Thank you very much, Joe. This is Tom Eisnhardt from Iowa State University, and I have the honor of presenting first and discussing some of the research, providing a little overview of the research that several of us and many others here at Iowa State and cooperators across Iowa have been conducting over the last 10 years under grazing management for water quality protection. And as Joe mentioned, the focus of today's presentation, I'll provide some introduction for about riparian management and the importance of knowing your stream. Jim's going to talk about more the grazing management, and Steve's going to talk about pathogens and livestock. But I suppose first we probably ought to start by providing acknowledgments for the support of the research. A lot of the initial support for the research was provided by our Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, which is a state of Iowa institution housed at Iowa State University. And building on that initial research, we were successful obtaining some funds through CSR EES and other support from the Iowa Beef Center, and then our local supporters or our local partners with our Rathbun Land and Water Alliance. And of course, all of our private landowners are essential in this research. Why do we get into this research? I think we all recognize the importance of water quality and the concern over water quality, the elevated concern over water quality issues over the last decade or so. And here I have a list of the causes of impairment, of those impaired waters, those 303 delisted streams by our U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And this is a national summary with the number of impairments on the left-hand axis and then the impairment on the bottom. And while some of them can be from point sources around our larger urban areas, I like to point out that those that I have circled there, pathogens, which is the #1 impairment nationally, nutrients, organic enrichment, sediment, impaired biota, and turbidity. Those are impairments that are directly related to our land use, and specifically are directly related to our land use immediately adjacent to our streams or within our riparian zone. So it's a great concern for local water quality. And one that's of emerging concern is the impact on local aquatic health. You noticed in that previous slide, biotic impairment or impaired biota was one of those impairments. Here in Iowa, it's actually our second leading cause of impairment. And so what is that? Why do we care about the local aquatic health? Increasingly, we're looking at those communities of fish and invertebrates like you see here as indicators of the integrity of our streams or the health of our streams in a holistic manner. These organisms spend the majority of their life as in insect form in their entire life, in case of the fish, within these streams communities and integrate the conditions day in and day out of water quality, of habitat, of sediment, of temperature, and oxygen. So increasingly we're looking at those communities and comparing them to our reference streams and provide some indication as to the health of our stream. And so here we have one here. This is an aquatic insect, and I'll point out here aquatic insect that is commonly used as an indicator of the quality of our water. And this critter will spend maybe 360 days of its life within our stream system, emerged as a winged adult for just 5 days, with the sole purpose of reproducing during that time and laying its eggs back into our stream systems. And so this one you can identify, and I'll challenge you here, you can identify by the tarsal claw here where I have an arrow where it just has one, and in the back it counts as 3 tails, and the other indicator are these gills along the abdomen. So I'll leave that there, and if anybody would like to join into the chat and tell me what sort of aquatic insect this is, we'll give a prize as to see who can get the right one. So local aquatic health is important, and one of the largest impacts for local aquatic health is the impact of suspended and embedded sediments for several reasons. One, they have a direct impact on aquatic life. They'll impair the visibility for prey capture and to avoid predation. Physical abrasion, they will clog the filtration and the respiratory organisms of these organs of these individuals. And then in many cases, in extreme cases, they'll smother and entrap. Then they'll have indirect on the aquatic ecology, indirect impacts like on decreased productivity of algal production, limited oxygen transport. And then of more direct concern for us, and I see that somebody already has the correct one there, and that was a mayfly that we had there. You can tell by the one tarsal claw, 3 tails, and the gills on the abdomen. We have more direct concerns in effect of suspended embedded sediments on recreation and drinking water. So that's local, but why else are we concerned about water quality and our riparian land use and our pasture management? And that's for downstream nutrient transport. And increasingly, those of us in the Midwest are seeing this as being a concern. Many of us are hearing about the issue of hypoxia or the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And so and it's thought to be through enhanced nutrient exports to the Gulf, increasing production and raining organic matter to the bottom of our seafloor, and increased respiration, reducing the oxygen level and causing some pretty grave concerns for those organisms that can't move out of that area. And so as we look back upstream into the Mississippi River Basin and try to do a portion where those nutrients are coming from, on the right-hand side you see there the yield in kilograms per square kilometer per year, and you can see those up in the upper Midwest are significant contributors to nutrients, downstream nutrients transport. On the left-hand side, it shows the relationship to land use and to those greatest nutrients of concern, that of phosphorus and nitrogen. And specific to the issue of pasture management, some new data is showing that on the left-hand side there, that 37% of the phosphorus is being thought to be coming now from pasture and rangeland. So there's downstream concerns as well, local water quality concerns and downstream concerns as well. I think there's a lot of data out there, and we're probably well familiar with the interaction between land use and watershed land use and water quality, and we have lots of data historically on the impacts of cropping systems or tilled systems, but increasingly we're seeing focus on the impacts of our pasture lands on water quality. And here's some data from our colleague John Downing at Iowa State University, who was looking at the relationship between the total percent of pasture lands in Rock Creek Lake on sediment transport and phosphorus and nitrogen transport. And we can see that even pasture lands, an increase in pasture lands, can have significant impacts in the transport of sediment, downstream transport of sediment, and the nutrients phosphorus and nitrogen. So this led sort of the basis of some of our research to look at this interaction between pasture management, land management, pasture management, particularly within the riparian zone, and local aquatic health and downstream nutrient transport. So the objectives of the research over the last 10 years or so have been, you can see here, to quantify the losses of phosphorus and sediment from stream banks in pastures grazed under different stocking, to look at that cattle behavior that Jim Russell will be talking about, and to provide some management models, to provide some suggestions for management to those landowners to both optimize the quality of stream water and the profitability of cow-calf pastures. And then, as Steve will be talking about, to look at the impacts of grazing management on the risk of pathogen loading to streams. But before we get into that local land use, one of the things that's come out of this research is the importance of not only that stream pasture management of the larger issues of stream hydrology. And so I'm going to use one example here to demonstrate the importance of stream hydrology in the interaction between stream hydrology and riparian management. I'm going to use sediment as an example. And where can sediment come from? We're familiar with many of the sources, like here in the upper left, where we have sheet and rill erosion and ephemeral gully and gully erosion. Other places are the classic gully erosion in the lower left. Increasingly, we're seeing that stream bank erosion can be a significant contributor to sediment and phosphorus loadings to streams and downstream transport. And then the impacts of riparian pasture management. We've demonstrated that these cattle access points and very poorly managed grazing can exacerbate the problem of sediment transport. But the important thing to note is when we're looking at the interaction between streams is to step back and look at some of the basics of streams and stream hydrology. And one of the important lessons that I hope that I might impress on you today is that streams are machines. And that streams and the interaction between the amount of water in the stream and the slope of that stream will necessarily equate into moving sediment in a downstream manner. So on this right-hand side of this simple balance, we see stream power, and that stream power is related to the amount of water within a stream, So fill that pitcher a little bit more, and that balance is going to shift to the right, or increase the slope of that stream by moving this out, and that will also increase that stream power. And then the left-hand side, streams will react by either moving more sediment to balance that out, or moving larger sediment. And so that's called Lane's equilibrium, or stream equilibrium, or dynamic equilibrium. And it's something that we really need to think about, and how that interacts with our local riparian management. Well, what happens when a stream does get out of balance? When we increase that stream power, either through increase impervious surface, stream channelization, increase in row crop production, whatever we do to increase that stream power on that right-hand side, streams will react in a predictable fashion. That's called our channel evolution model, where streams, that Q2 is that discharge, that 2-year discharge, where in that stable stage 1, that stream will be out on its banks, dissipating its energy, flooding every 1.5 to 2 to 3 years. And we have these low stable banks where H, that height of that stream bank, is below that H sub C, which is that critical height, and we're in equilibrium. We increase stream power and we move into this stage 2, and the streams will react by moving more sediments, and they'll initially get that from their bed and their banks, and they'll cut that bank down, cut that bed down, and they'll start to undercut the banks. And we see the result of that are twofold, is that we now have those stream bank heights that are above that critical height, and we're now containing those smaller discharge events within the stream and not dissipating the energy. So we move into stage 3, where we're undercutting those banks, widening, and we see the vegetation falling in. We get into that widening phase, and this will be obvious through severe erosion in our stream banks on both the inside, outside bends and straight stretches. And eventually, our channels are going to re-equilibrate into this widening phase, and then into stage 5, into the stabilizing stage, and then stage 5, the stable stage, where we've abandoned that old floodplain. It becomes a terrace, and we now have this lower floodplain, and importantly, those banks are now below that critical height. So streams are machines, and really there's lots of examples that can impress you upon this, and some large-scale examples. And here's one local where we've historically thought that channelization was a good idea to reduce local flooding. And here's an example from our South Skunk River, just south of Ames, Iowa, where in the early 1900s we straightened this stream in the 1930s. And these photos that I'll impress on you are from the exact same location. Just notice the bridge here in the same scale. And by the 1990s, notice the meandering back in the streams. In the 2007, a recent photo, notice the meanderings back in the streams. So these streams are machines. They're dissipating their energy by increasing that meandering, reducing its gradient, reducing its slope, and that the amplitude and sinuosity is actually predictable based on some regional and climatic factors. So we wanted to look at this interaction between hydrology and local land use, and our first study was a long-term study, a 7-year study, and we looked at this at 3 ecoregions in Iowa, northeast, southeast, and central Iowa. And we were looking at bank erosion, and as it related to bank erosion and phosphorus transports from the stream bank related to land use, and compared crop fields, buffers, and grazed pastures using a simple erosion pin method, where we would put erosion pins in the stream bank and let them out leave them exposed by 4 inches, and then go back 1 or 2 or 3 times a year and measure the amount of pin that's been exposed and relate that to the stream bank recession rates. What we've seen over time is that all else held equal in hydrologically is that land use can be very, very important. And here we look at soil loss on the left-hand side and compare that amongst row crop pastures, continuous pastures, rotational pastures, grass filters, and riparian forest buffers. And that red line there is just to indicate that the rate of stream bank erosion or soil loss from when we have perennial vegetation along the stream. We can see that if we denude those stream banks of all that perennial vegetation, we can potentially greatly increase that soil loss. And that pastures, the management of pastures is also important and is related to that amount of soil loss. So, but the important lesson is that we are reminded on a recent study that relationship is not that simple. We have an ongoing study where we're comparing these same sort of things with impaired watersheds in central Iowa. We're measuring stream bank erosion rates among riparian land uses of pasture, grass, cool season and warm season grasses and forests using similar methods. And here you can see one of the mechanisms where these stream banks get undercut, and then you have that slab failure or that toppling failure. And what we see on this, if we look at a 2-year data set between 2000 and 2006, or 2005 and 2007, and here we're looking at stream bank erosion rates in centimeters, that pin recession value in centimeters, and comparing grasslands, pastures, and riparian zones, and a couple of things really stand out for us. And one is the importance of precipitation and the importance of discharge. And the square that I've put up there, if we look at 2005 and 2006 on the left, it was a very, very dry year, and we see very low rates of stream bank erosion, 1.7, 0, and 0. Whereas you get into the next year of 2007, a very, very wet year, and we see much higher rates of stream bank erosion. And so hydrology, precipitation is a driver in this. A second is the importance of single events. And here we had a unique case where we measured the pins, and shortly after we measured the pins, a large overbank event occurred. And so we had an opportunity to go back in there and measure right after a single event, which we did. And we can see that single event will contribute large amounts of the total. In this case, over half of the total of that 2-year total of 19.1, about 10 of that came from that single event. So when we compare the land use relationships to stream bank erosion, and I told you our other earlier studies showed that perennial vegetation in forest had the lowest erosion, and compare here grassland 6.6, pasture of 4.9, and that riparian forest of 9.6. So in this case, the riparian forests had the largest stream bank erosion rates. Why did that happen? And that comes back to that importance of stream hydrology. When we look closer at this watershed, we can see that the upstream part of this watershed above the forest had been channelized, historically channelized. And so active evolution was occurring, and those streams downstream were reacting. And so the stream down below here on the right was actively downcutting. You can see these eroding banks, and you can see those trees are being undercut and toppled. So it wouldn't matter in what case, what that land use was, whether this was pasture, whether this was row crop or riparian forest in this downstream site. Those local management factors were being overridden by watershed hydrology. So lessons learned from these studies: bed and bank erosion can impact local aquatic health and can be a significant source of downstream sediment. Some of our studies are showing that well over 50% of the phosphorus, sediment and phosphorus transported downstream in these regions are coming from bed and bank erosion. Second lesson is that stream disequilibrium and channel evolution stage can and will override those local management, but all else held equal, under stable hydrology, riparian land use is an important factor in stream bank erosion rates, and perennial vegetation or well-managed pastures will reduce that stream bank erosion. So what landowner options do we have? What management options do landowners have or land managers have? One is we can change that riparian land use. We can't put in buffers, and there's a number of incentives for filter strips and riparian forest buffers. And the questions we have, particularly if we don't want to give up valuable cropland or pasture, is how wide? And a lot of our research has now shown it does not have to be that wide. That narrow buffer width will give significant changes or significantly improve stream bank stability and reduce that stream bank erosion. Others are active stream bank stabilization, hardening off those banks, or from a more holistic or watershed perspective, what can we do to reduce that stream power, reduce the energy in that stream? So just real quick, 3 pictures or 4 pictures that might show some of that. In some cases, here's one of our landowners, one of our cooperators. On the left-hand side, we're looking downstream, pretty intensive grazing in this system, and you can see that stream bank is eroding on the inside, outside, and straight stretches. Whereas on the right-hand side, if you just turn around and look upstream, where we just reduced cattle access and did a little bit of active revegetation, you can see those banks are stable and not receding at a very high rate at all. So narrow riparian buffers. In some cases, wider riparian buffers can certainly be an advantage, especially if we want to have other ecosystem services such as wildlife habitat. And here's an example from our Bear Creek watershed in central Iowa. before buffer establishment, and then that exact same location, notice the bridge in the background, just 5 years later. We can actively stabilize stream banks. Here we have an eroding bank, and we can go to the sort of Cadillac of systems where we pull that bank back to a stable slope and use rock or other sorts of toe stabilization, and then use perennial vegetation. This certainly will reduce erosion on this location. We need to consider the interactions between downstream if we harden off a point, any single point. And then a last example that we're looking at from a watershed perspective is putting in these series, if we can identify within a subwatershed where we have these erosive features, where we might have nick points moving up through a stream that are going to impact those upstream landowners. If we can identify those, it's possible that we can put in these series of weirs or pool riffle structures, and here you can see the spacing of them where we have them in series of 5. And this act of cascading over these rocks and then hitting a pool of water created by the riffle below it and that spacing below it will actually reduce the energy of that stream, reduce its erosive power, and reduce its demand for sediment. So we're reducing stream power in that case. So the lessons that we were learning, important lessons that we were learning again, is that local management can be important if things are stable, but stream hydrology can override some of those factors. And what Jim Russell is going to be presenting for us now is some of the lessons that we've learned about the interaction between that local management and those grazing management